The last maybe 3 years, it's been on my mind to go teach overseas, and then my dad wasn't well. And so I knew I couldn't go anywhere, and then unfortunately he passed away. And then I thought, well, maybe it's time. Maybe it is time now to do this. So it was really Garrison that was pushing me, because his dream was also to go to Asia. It wasn't my dream to go to Asia. It was my dream to teach overseas, but Asia wasn't even on my radar. But it was his dream to go to Asia. I started looking, and when I did start looking, China was actually the best deal, because they have a program through the Nova Scotia International Students Program where teachers can teach overseas. I think Nova Scotia has 14 Nova Scotia curriculum schools in China. And the reason it's so good is because it's almost like I'm teaching in Nova Scotia. Because it's the Nova Scotia curriculum, I didn't have to get used to new operating systems. The curriculum was the same, and what was even better is that Garrison could do his grade 11 there just like he was going to school at Richmond Academy. I first contacted a man from Antigonish who was a principal, Gerard Ryan, and it just so happens he was coming home from March break. And he said, well, come and we'll do an interview. And I did have an interview with him, and I was successful in the interview. But at the same time, there were other schools that I was interested in different parts of China. His school district was near Beijing. And Garrison really wanted to go more to the north, which was Chengdu. And then we looked at another school we both liked, which was in Nanchang, which at the time we called Nanchang, because that's how it was spelled and that's how we thought we pronounced it. And there wasn't a job opening in Nanchang, but I had the principal's email, and I just sent off an email and said, look, I'm a teacher, this is what I'm looking for, blah, blah. And the very next day I got a response saying that they were looking for someone. So we got in contact, had a phone interview, and he offered me a job teaching Canadian history. And I thought, wow. So then I had to decide between the two, and Garrison and I went back and forth and finally decided that, yes, we would take the one in Nanchang. And I think it was mainly because it wasn't as industrialized. It was a smaller city than the other city, and it was on the river. And we had a good feeling about it. So that's how we ended up there.
You were telling me earlier that you left on August 28th. Can you paint a picture of what it was like the night before for you and your son Garrison?
It's funny, whenever we go somewhere new, you kind of block it out until the day that it happens. And there was so much paperwork to prepare, getting our visas, and we had to fly to Ottawa and get all of our paperwork done there. And then, so it was a really busy, August. And before we left, it almost doesn't seem real. That's the only way I can say it. We just kept saying, we're moving to China. We're going to China tomorrow. And it was just the craziest. And then when we arrived, and of course we spent the night at the hotel airport, and then saying goodbye to Michael, and getting on the plane and it being real. It was very interesting.
You brought up your husband, Michael, and I know that just a couple of years ago, you and Michael and Garrison and your daughter Ainsley spent a year in France while you were teaching over there. But can you speak a little bit to what's involved in a couple voluntarily willing to be apart for a year like you folks did with this trip to China? What was that like?
I'm really very lucky. Very lucky for many reasons, but Michael and I have been together since I'm 16 years old. So we celebrated our 28th wedding anniversary when I was away in China. I couldn't do the things that I do if I didn't have a husband who understands that that's what I have to run. I have to explore. It's just who I am, and he is comfortable enough with himself and with our relationship to know that that's okay. So in all this talking I'm doing, you can't talk without saying a thank you to him. talking about relationships and how relationships grow and change over time. And just over time, you get to know the other person well enough to know what they need, and that becomes as important. What they need becomes as important as what you need. So Michael recognizes that, and I'm really thankful.
So can you walk me through the first couple of days for you and Garrison as you're touching down in China? What was that like?
The reason I'm laughing is because one of the most hair-raising experiences was the first day medical checks that you have to do. But we flew in, when we arrived, we flew into Beijing. And then from Beijing, we flew to Nanjing. And someone picked us up at the airport, and the office staff there was fantastic. Shout out to Echo and Susan. The school is amazing to support you, and you arrive and they set you up with your phone. They set you up with your apartment. And so we arrived, and Echo picked us up and took us to our apartment, which was absolutely gorgeous. It was a 2-bedroom, beautiful apartment on the 21st floor. That in itself was very different for us because we grew up in Jamrons Island most of the time, and then here in Port Hawkesbury in our own house, and had never lived. We lived in the city in France, but it wasn't a high-rise building. So that was interesting. We had a balcony, and it was just very exciting, really exciting. And we arrived that night, I think at 6:30, and had traveled 36 hours. And I had to get up the next morning at 10 o'clock to do my medical checks. So at 10 o'clock, we had to meet at the school, and all of the new teachers were put on a shuttle bus and taken to this medical exam place. And when you arrived there, it was just almost like a factory. It was this big building, but you walked in and it was, you take your picture here, and then you go to this desk, and they'd point to this side, and they'd say, go to this room. And a lot of times you were didn't know where you were going, and then it was, and you don't speak the language, right? So Echo is telling you where to go, but everybody you're dealing with, nobody speaks the language. So we had to have a blood test. And then, I'm going, oh God, I hope they wash their hands, and I hope. And then, but the most kind of hair-raising experience is we had to do a urine sample. But, here you get a cup and you have a sealed cap. No. They passed you this, it was about this big, and it looked like a big plastic spoon. And they sent you off into a bathroom that was a squat toilet, because almost all public bathrooms in China are squat toilets. So it's just like a hole that has porcelain around it, and you stand on it. And so into the squat toilet with this spoon that you were expected to pee on, and then you would come out into the lobby in front of everyone with this cup. It wasn't even a cup, it was like a plastic spoon. And then you'd pass it over to them. It wasn't labeled. I don't even know how they knew it was mine. So it was really almost degrading. It was And then after that, we went up and they did an ultrasound. And then there was a colorblind test, and then there was a hearing test. And for the hearing test, they did they would put they would check your ears, but they would use the same probe on everyone, and there were did not change tips or anything. After that was all over, when I got back to the apartment, I told, because Garrison didn't have to do it, it was just the teachers that had to do it. And I said to Garrison, okay, if I survive that, and I'm okay with it, the rest is going to be good. And it's funny because all of the new teachers, nobody really talked about it. We only talked about it about a month later when we all got together, and we were like, what was that? So that was very interesting. And just getting your phone, but I think my favorite thing, and Garrison's as well, was going to grocery stores, because they're so different, and there are so many variety of green things. I just would say grass. I don't know what it was half the time. I would go in and I'd pick it up and I'd say, Garrison, what is this variety of grass? You just never quite knew what there were just vegetables and fruits and foliage that I had never seen. And even your smallest corner stores had aquariums with your fish, so you could say, I want that fish. And then you might look on the floor and there would be a basket with frogs in it, and they would just be like jumping, and you could say, well, I want those frogs. It just stuff that you never see.
Now, even though you were experiencing moments like these, you knew you weren't the only Nova Scotian over there in this teaching scenario. Did you and your fellow teachers have any kind of bonding moments where you were learning a new culture and a new language together? Were there any times like that during your time in China?
Lots of bonding moments. I think that's probably what I loved about teaching in China, because everyone that is there is pretty much there without their family. You become a family. And we went out to eat. There was a group of us, maybe about 4 of us, that were either new or we just tended to click. And we would go out to supper at least once, twice a week. And usually doing hot pot was our favorite. But always trying out a different restaurant, and the food was generally cheap. Chinese food is super cheap. Like if you're sticking to not the Chinese food you'd think of here, but traditional Chinese food, it's really cheap. More expensive if you're having other types of food, but generally very cheap. And just for my 50th birthday, they threw me a big bash. They got together, it was a surprise at a hotel, and then we had a big supper together. Like, just, that happened a lot. And that's something I'm really going to miss here, because, I don't know, you get into your routine. You go to work, you come home, you get in your pajamas, and you do it all over again the next day. And it's just, we went out more.
What was the classroom environment like for you, and what were your students like?
My students were amazing. Amazing just because I've always had good students. I mean, I've been really lucky. But they're the most dedicated, conscientious students that I've ever worked with. The Chinese culture is very much about education and respect for education and getting a good education. And I was privileged because I worked in a private school, so parents were paying a lot of money for the kids to go to this school, because it was a 10 to 12 school, and the students had to write an entrance exam to get in. So the classes were, the students were very conscientious. Whatever you gave them to do, they did most times more than what you would ask for. And what was really hard, and I think I had made a Facebook post about it, is there were no discipline issues. Like I never had a discipline issue. I don't know what that is. They come in. If someone's talking, you just say, and they stop. And if they don't, I would just have to tell their head teacher, because the school that I was working at we were teamed up at every grade level. We were teamed up with a Chinese teacher who piggybacked with you. So, for example, I taught all of the grade 11 Canadian history, and there were 6 classes. So, the AB class would have one Chinese teacher assigned to them, and they would also take subjects with that teacher. But that was our liaison, because they also spoke English. So, and they were so supportive. So if I would have any issue, I would just say it, and they would talk to the students, and then the parents would talk to them, and it was done. So, amazing students, just very conscientious. I tell a story. Every Monday I would go in and say, "What did you do on the weekend?" And they would say, "Study." So I stopped asking, because that's just, like I said, part of their culture.
Did you find that the students were also interested in your culture and where you came from?
Yeah, they were, because I was teaching Canadian history, so I was always talking about Canada. And of course, the reason they're at this school, which is the school that I was at, it's called Nanchang Number 2, and it's the program that the students are in is called the Sino-Canadian program. And the reason they're in that program is because they want to go to an English university. So it's an English immersion, basically. They start in grade 10, 11, and 12. So they do 10, 11, and 12. And it's all their courses are in English. So it's all either Canadian. Most of the teachers are Canadian. There are a lot of Filipino teachers. And teachers, there were 2 teachers from the U.S., a teacher from Australia as well. So they were absolutely, they're curious. Because they want to go to an English university, and I think about 95% of them end up in Canada.
Can you paint a picture for us of Nanchang, the community where you lived and worked?
It's a big city. There are 5.5 million people. So it's a small city for China, but big for me, of course, about the size of Chicago. We were living in a section called Honggatong New District. So it was the new district. So we lived on that side of the bridge. On the other side of the bridge was the older section of Nanchang, which I actually liked more because I found it more authentic. So Garrison and I, when we went over to the park there, and we both walked down little streets that had all the little shops, and it felt more like kind of authentic. Whereas Nanchang is like any other big city. It has big malls, like huge malls, within walking distance of our place. It has a subway system, and the subway system is really efficient and cheap. I think it costs, I can't even remember what it costs to go on the subway, but it's really, really cheap and efficient, fast, clean. The city's super clean where we lived. Flowers planted everywhere all the time. I didn't get to know a whole lot of actual Chinese people because in Nanchang it's what's called a third-tier city, which means that it's not as westernized as other cities. So it's Western in the fact that you have all of the amenities. There was Burger King, there was McDonald's, Pizza Hut, plus all of the Chinese, but there weren't many people who were non-Chinese. So we could go. The only people that I saw that were non-Chinese were my colleagues. Garrison and I could go 2 or 3 weeks and not see another non-Chinese person.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so we'd be in the mall, and from a distance we'd see someone that was North American, and we'd be like, look at them, there they are, look, way over there. So as far as I met a few people, it's really funny. In China they use something called WeChat, and it's almost like WhatsApp, and it's almost like a Facebook, but it's more powerful. So you do everything with your WeChat. So you talk to people, so it's social media, but it's also connected to your bank account. So you pay everything with a scan code. So when you go to the grocery store, you just put your scan code and it pays directly from your. So it's China, as far as technology, is way beyond here. It's almost cashless. Like once I only used cash for the first month that I was there. Then after that I didn't use cash, and I could pay everything from. So when I was in Thailand, I was paying my phone bill from Thailand because you just pay everything through WeChat. And the same thing is if you go out to supper and you're all paying on the same bill, you just divvy it up, and then I can just send the money to you, almost like an e-transfer, but more convenient. So you just click and it's gone. So I met some people through WeChat. I'd go into a store and they were fascinated. In general, many people were fascinated with Garrison and I, with white people. So sometimes I would go into a grocery store. I met one girl at a food. It was called World Fruit, and she asked me to be her friend. So actually, we still talk every now and then. I met another person just on the street, we bumped into each other and started talking, and he took my WeChat and we became friends. So some people I just met like that. But for the most part, the people I hung out with were my colleagues.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you celebrated your birthday over in China, and I understand that you stayed over there through Christmas as well. So what is Christmas like in northern China?
Christmas is there's not really Christmas. It's starting to be a little bit westernized, which Garrison didn't like. He was like, "Oh, there shouldn't be," because it's not their religion. They don't celebrate Christmas. So, but they are starting. Like, there was some Christmas music in the mall, and there were decorations up, and there were a few Christmas trees here and there. This is the first year that I didn't have a Christmas tree. We didn't bother. Some of my friends did. They ordered on, here you order on Amazon. There you order from something called Taobao. So it's a Chinese version. And, but I didn't order a Christmas tree. For Christmas, for school, I had Christmas Day off. That's it.
Just the one day?
One day, Christmas Day. And then I had New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. That was my Christmas break. What happened is we get 3 weeks off in January. So my break, so we only had those 3 days. And then we went back for maybe 1 week, and then we had exams. And then right after exams, we had 1 week of second semester, and then we went on break. So you get a 3-week break from, we were off from the 16th of January till the 10th of February. I went on vacation, the 16th of January. I didn't really know about COVID on the 16th of January. So when I went to fly on the 19th, I was talking to Michael, and it was Michael who told me. So I'm in China. I know nothing about. So Michael said to me, "Lisa, when you're flying, make sure you have a mask." And I said, "Oh, okay." So my friend Cassandra had picked up masks for us, and we got on our flights, put our masks on, and away we went. I knew, again, nothing. So when I left, I wanted to go as light as I could, because every flight that you take you're allowed to take 7 kg carry-on. So this is what I had.
Okay, show us that. There we go.
This is what I traveled with.
Yeah.
I didn't take my computer. I didn't, because I was going on vacation.
Yeah.
And I really was only going for 2.5 weeks. I had decided I would go back on February 4th so that I could enjoy some time just in my apartment and get set up for second semester. So get to China, and at this point I knew there was COVID, but I didn't, that's all I really knew. And then I started traveling. So my first travel was to Laos. A colleague of mine and I went to Laos for 4 days. No talk of COVID really at this point. Nobody was wearing masks. People were traveling, lots of tourists around. And then after that I went back to Thailand and went down to the beaches in Krabi. And I met a girl there from the States who was also a teacher. And we had supper together, and she said, our school is delayed a week. And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, because of COVID." And I'm like, of course, at that time it was called the coronavirus. And I said, "Really?" I said, "I haven't heard anything." So then I started to go, "Oh, well, interesting." But it's still, I have to kind of backtrack, because before I went down to the beaches, actually, I met up in Bangkok with Nora and her parents. We had an international student who lived with us for 4 years here in Port Hawkesbury, and she is now back in Bangkok, and actually she got into med school, so she's studying there at the university. So her parents drove in from their town, which is about 3 hours outside of Bangkok, and they met me at the airport, and we spent 4 days together in Bangkok. So while we were together, that's when they started talking about corona, so I tried to find masks. We went to 4 stores before I could find a mask. We kept checking, there were no masks, they were all out of masks. So finally I did find I think I ended up getting 4 masks because I wanted them to fly, because every time I was in an enclosed space, I wanted to have one on. But other than that, I did not wear a mask. So, so then we got news, like I was down on the beaches, and I got news that our school would be delayed a week. So at this point, I was 2 weeks in to my vacation, and I thought, oh, well, what am I going to do now? And then my flight was canceled, so I was supposed to go back to China on the 4th of February, and the airlines canceled the flights. So this is when I started realizing, oh, something's up. Okay. So I decided to go back. I ended up flying to Chiang Mai because that's where my principal was, and his wife, who's also a teacher, and my friend Cassandra, who's also a teacher, and I went to meet them. So then I got word shortly after that we would be going to teaching online right away. So my vacation the last 4 or 5 days kind of got cut short because I was trying to learn all the new systems. And on top of that, I had no computer because I had my book bag. So I had to go out and buy a computer in Thailand, which I didn't quite know what to do because I didn't know how the language would work, and it all worked out fine. So I did buy a new computer, and at the time I was staying in a hostel because I didn't know how long this was going to go, so I kind of started to watch my budget because I had to pay to stay there every day and I had to eat every day. So I was staying in a hostel, so it was funny when I first started teaching online, I would just close my curtain and go in my bunk and teach from my bunk. But we had to learn how to use Zoom that I had never used before, and things are a bit more complicated because in China you can't use YouTube, you can't use Google because of all of the blocks that they have. So I did have a VPN in China, but sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Now I'm in Thailand and all of that works, but you've got to be careful what you use because the kids in China are not allowed to use those things. So we had to, I didn't have Google Classroom that I could just post things to. We had Microsoft 360. So I had to learn how to use that and how to share links with that. And it was just a huge, huge learning curve.
So how long were you in Thailand, and when did things start shifting?
I was in Thailand a month. I went from Chiang Mai to a place called Pai, which was the coolest place ever. I was staying in a mud hut. It was all painted and everything, but it was so cool. Goodness. Yeah. And anyway, I was there for 8 days, and I would have stayed longer, but you can only stay in one country for 30 days, and then you have to either renew your visa or you have to leave the country. So I had to leave Thailand because my visa was running out. So from Thailand, I went to Cambodia because it was as cheap to fly to Cambodia as it was to renew my visa. And I thought it was $65 for me to fly to Cambodia. So I thought, well, I'm here. I may never get to Asia again. I might as well go to another country. And I had met people along the way. And my friend Jessica that I had met on the beaches, she was in Cambodia. So I thought, well, I should go to Cambodia. So I asked my colleague, and he went to Cambodia as well. So we flew to Cambodia, and I was in Cambodia 3 weeks. None of this time was I wearing a mask. The only time I wore a mask is when I flew. I was in Cambodia about 2 weeks. The first week we were there were still lots of tourists. The second week, because it would have been the second week I would have been there, it would have been towards the end of February. And by the third week, it was sad. Sad for the local people. I got kind of attached to Cambodia because I was there for 3 weeks. And when I was in Thailand, I was moving around. So I met people, but I never really felt like I kind of lived there. But Cambodia, I was there 3 weeks. So I started to meet people at church. I started to have a kind of a community around me. So I was starting to feel for the people because they survive on tourism. So Cambodia was I guess I'd say in French, coup de cœur. Like, I never expected to like Cambodia, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. I met a man at church, and he was, I think he's 82, and he and his wife founded a school, and he invited me to the school. So I got to go and meet the teachers and meet all the kids at the school. And then I was invited to go back another day for their music class, and they were singing. It was really something spectacular. I probably would say that I'll end up, when I retire, going back to Cambodia and probably volunteering, because I didn't get a chance to go to the orphanage, and I would have liked to have gone to the orphanage. And even just, there's so much need in that country, and the people are so gracious and beautiful, just really, really beautiful people. Just, they have so little, but they're just generally smiling, and yeah, it was, I think that's what I like about traveling, is meeting. I like meeting local people, so I prefer to go somewhere for a longer period of time, and then you get to know people. Because to me, it's nice to see things, but I like to meet people.
You mentioned that by this point you weren't wearing a mask regularly. Were there any kind of directives or instructions from the governments of the countries that you were in at any given moment, or public health offices or any similar organizations, to wear a mask, to social distance, or follow any other specific rules with regard to COVID-19?
There wasn't really any directive until the beginning of March. So really the full month of February, it was all happening around, and I was watching it. Like, on my phone at this point, I belong to something called Jiangxi Tube, which is the province where I lived, and it was reporting on the number of cases, and so I knew, like, okay, this is really happening, and I was watching the news. But where I was in Thailand, there were hardly any cases. In Cambodia, when I first arrived, there were none, 0 cases. It's only the last, like my 3rd week in Cambodia, that they had cases. And then people started to wear masks. And it was funny because one day I was in a business getting my SIM card changed, because every country you go to, you get your SIM card for your internet, which $15, I could have internet for almost a whole month, unlimited internet. So, but I was going to get a new SIM card, and one of the local Cambodian people who happened to speak English kind of chewed me out because I didn't have a mask on. So people were starting to get a little bit, but there was still no directive from like the government or anything at this point. So by the 3rd week in Cambodia, it was, again, sad, because when you'd go to the temples, normally these temples, they have millions of visitors every year. And especially if you go to Angkor Wat, which is the biggest one, you can barely get to the temple. When I went, the last temple I went to was called Lady's Temple. There might have been 10 people. Yeah, it was pretty sad. And it's been like that. Like, I still keep in contact with someone from Cambodia, and like 2 months now, and there's been no work. And for places like that, their government doesn't have things in place for their people. Like, we got CERB and whatever, that does not exist in these countries. So from Cambodia, then I decided, because at this point I still didn't know, I was still under the impression that we were going to go back to China. So I thought, well, I might as well go to Vietnam. I haven't been to Vietnam, because my visa was going to run out in Cambodia again. And I thought, do I stay here? I had seen all the temples, and my friend John had left the week before, so I was in Cambodia for a week by myself. And so I said, well, maybe I'll go to Vietnam. So I told my friend Cassandra I was going, and she decided she would go. So she rented an Airbnb. The plan was for us to meet in Vietnam. So I left and flew to Vietnam and thought, oh, great, I'll get to see some more of Vietnam. And I was in Da Nang, which is a beach town. So when I got there and I arrived at the airport, it was like things had shifted. It took me about an hour and a half to get through all of the checks. You had to sign a bunch of papers. You had to confirm. Blah, blah, blah. It was, and the people were not friendly at all. It was just a total shift to what I had experienced. So I thought, gee, so Corona's really starting to, like, it's starting to change. So when I arrived, I got back to my hotel, and I wasn't at the hotel 5 minutes. I got a message from my friend Cassandra, I can't make it. And I thought, oh, why? Because they were closing Vietnam. They were shutting it down to all foreigners. So this is what was starting to happen now. So now Vietnam was shut. So no foreign nationals were allowed to fly into Vietnam. So I arrived in one of the last, like, our plane was one of the last ones in. But then she texted me later and said, no, because I'm getting in before noon, her flight was arriving at 11, she could make it. So she did end up coming. So we had an apartment. But it was now starting to not be fun. People were starting to wear masks everywhere. We went out to the mall one day. You had to have your mask on, and they were temperature checking. There were hardly any tourists around anymore. A lot of the businesses, bars, a lot of the restaurants were closed. So it was almost like a ghost town feeling. It was not. The beach was still there, and you were still allowed to swim. So that was beautiful, but it definitely was not a vibe that you would want to stay there. And it was, it was getting to the point that a lot of the tourist attractions were shutting. So I really didn't see anything in Vietnam. I was in Da Nang, but I didn't do anything other than go to the beach because there was really nothing at this point. So that's when she was getting nervous, and she said, well, at this point it was good in China again. And I know a lot of people out there think, oh yeah, they're just saying that in China. No, like, colleagues of mine were living there. So we knew that wasn't something that was made up. It really was. The kids were allowed out. The kids didn't go out for 2.5 months. Like, they literally stayed in their apartment for 2.5 months. But they were allowed out again. And so my friend Cassandra decided that the safest place and probably the best place is China. So I thought, well, okay. So I decided with her that I would go back to China. So we made all of our arrangements, and because you can't just go back to China. We had to contact our business officer and get quarantine officer, and we had to get our quarantine set up because you had to quarantine for 14 days. And so we got our flights for a week later so that we could get all our paperwork done. So we were in Da Nang, and she was going to fly out on Saturdays, and this was on Friday, like, morning. We got all this set up. Well, it was earlier in the week we got it set up, knowing that we'd be going back to China. And she booked her flight for Saturday to fly back to Bangkok, because all of the flights fly out of Bangkok. So you can't get a direct flight from Vietnam. All your major flights fly out of Bangkok in Thailand. So she knew that. So I said, well, I'm going to stay another, 5 days. We're only leaving on Friday. So I said, I'll fly out on Thursday. It'll give me another 5 days on the beach or whatever. She said, okay, fine. So that night at around supper time, she's trying to book a hotel in Bangkok, and she gets this alert that says Thailand is going to be shutting its borders on Saturday at midnight. My flight was already booked for like 5 days later. She was okay because her flight was already booked. So then I had to get on and try to book a flight for the next day. This was like Friday evening. So I'm like, oh no. So I'd see a flight, I'd click on it, sold out. This went on for about an hour and a half, and I'm thinking, I'm going to get stuck here in Vietnam. Like, I can't get out, and I'm not going to get my flight back to China. Finally, I found a flight, but I couldn't fly. I couldn't fly directly out of Da Nang. I had to fly Da Nang to Hanoi, to the capital city, and then fly to Bangkok. So I did get my flight. I got the last flight leaving out of Hanoi Saturday night to get back to Bangkok before they shut everything down. So we got up the next morning and we kind of went our separate way. We left at the same time, but she was flying right out of Da Nang, but I had to go Da Nang to Hanoi. So when I got to the airport, I had to go to a different terminal. When I got to the terminal, I could not find my flight on the board. And in the airport, the board was just red with canceled flights. People in the airport were freaking out because they were getting stuck there. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to be stuck here too. So what happened is it wasn't visible on the board because for half an hour they were rescheduling the flight. But when they rescheduled, then I was afraid I wasn't going to make my connecting flight. It all turned out I did make my connecting flight, but it was just get there, get on a bus, and get right to Bangkok. So I arrived in Bangkok at like 11:30 that night, and I just made it, and the plane was full. There wasn't one seat left because everybody was trying to get out. So it was starting to get real. And I was going, okay, this is not fun anymore. I had lots of fun. This is not anymore fun. So when I got to Bangkok, I was really happy. And then I was waiting for my flight to go home to China. So that's when the fun started again. Because I waited, I arrived there on, well, it would have been Saturday. So I arrived there on Saturday and my flight wasn't leaving until Friday. So I had to be there almost a whole week. So I had to find a hotel to stay in. And when I arrived, it was Thursday night and our flights to China were leaving on Friday. And at 10:30 Friday night, I got an email from my principal. And he said, not an email, a WeChat message, because that's how we communicate.
Yes.
And he said, Lisa, just giving you a heads up, China is closing its borders to all foreign nationals as of midnight. I said, Jordan, my flight arrives at 1 a.m. So I thought, what does that mean? So then we were trying to get a hold of the business officer, and this is at 10:30 at night, and it's 11:30 in China. So going back and forth, no answers. So I went to bed that night not knowing what was up. And my friend Cassandra goes to bed early, so she was already asleep, and I couldn't contact her. So it was a late night. So then I was calling home to Michael saying, this is what's up. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to China. I don't know if I'm not. I don't know what's happening. And so I didn't sleep much that night. And then I finally fell asleep. And when I woke up, it was 8 o'clock that morning. And the flight wasn't until later in the day. And I think at that point I had said, I don't think I can do this. I can't risk getting there. And at this time, it was still up in the air about the quarantine and what the conditions were going to be like. He never, ever panicked, and it was always my decision. Not at any point did he ever say, Lisa, come home. He trusted me enough to know that I knew when it was safe and when it wasn't. I had people on Facebook saying to me, why aren't you coming home? Aren't you afraid? I was never afraid. So I knew my limits. But it was getting scary now. But Michael didn't ever say, Lisa, it's time for you to come home. Never. And whatever decision I made, he supported me in that, which was amazing.
So did you finally make it back into China? How did that all work out?
So when I tried to get back to China, again, I had decided, that next morning my friend called and I said, what's going on? She said, I rebooked the flight earlier. I'm still going. And I wasn't able to, and it was really expensive. And I said, Cassandra, this is a sign. I'm not going back to China. Obviously, I was not meant to go back to China. So I said, I don't know what that means. And so at that point, I had decided that I would go to Phuket. And that's where my friend John was. So I said, I'll just go to Phuket. Things are fine, whatever. Because it's not that I didn't want to come home necessarily, it's that I still thought we'd be going back to China. And I was afraid that I would just fly home And because things were opening up in China again. And I thought then our school would open and I would have to fly back to China. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I booked a flight to Phuket. And when I did that, then an alert came from the Canadian government. So because when you go to a country, you register with the embassy. So they then send you alerts. So the alert came, if you're a Canadian and you're in Thailand, by the 31st of March, you need to come home because we don't guarantee that there'll be flights after that. So there had been little alerts before about coming home, and I'd kind of ignored them because everything was fine. But now I really thought, wow, like, yikes. This is... And again, it wasn't feeling comfortable anymore because it was... And I didn't know, like, if you were in Thailand, were they going to extend your visa? Because every month, your visa would run out. I mean, I was in consultation with my principal, and he said, because that's where he is. He's still there. He and his wife and his daughter still haven't been able to go back to China. The new school year has started, and he's in Thailand. But the school's running in China. So he said, well, they'll there's so many foreigners here, they're not going to kick us all out. Where are we going to go? So I met my friend Cassandra at the airport to give her my key to my apartment because I still have my apartment with all my stuff in China. And while we were there, she said, Lisa, you should go home. And I thought, she said, did you try to find a flight? And I said, well, I tried to find a flight, but they were all routing through New York and Chicago. And at the time, New York was terrible. I said, I'm not flying through New York. And then my principal said, well, Lisa, check flights through Vancouver. So when I checked through Vancouver, there was a flight. And so Cassandra said, well, just book it. So I didn't even think about it. I just pressed it and booked it. And then once I booked it, it was like, oh, wow, I'm going home. And I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't ready to have it end like that. I didn't see my colleagues again. I didn't see my students again. It was like, it was almost like I was grieving. I didn't get to finish anything.
You didn't get closure?
No closure. So when I left Cassandra at the airport because she was flying to China, and I had to go back to my hotel because I was at the airport thinking I was flying to Phuket, but I booked my flight and now I'm flying to Canada, but my flight wasn't until the next day. So I had to get back on the bus and go back to my hotel, and I showed up, yeah, I'm here again, I'm not going till tomorrow, and I'm going to Canada now. So yeah, and then I didn't know what was facing me when I flew home because I didn't know, am I going to be quarantined? I went online, couldn't really find any good information. Am I going to be quarantined in Vancouver? Am I going to be quarantined in Toronto? Am I just going to go right through to Halifax? And then it was, like I said, getting back to my hotel that night, realizing that all my adventures were over. So it was a very tearful night. It was not a good night. And of course I was happy I was coming home, but it was just ended so abruptly. And then flying home was I flew from Bangkok to Tokyo to Vancouver, Vancouver to Toronto, Toronto to Halifax. Early Saturday morning I left. And I arrived Sunday night, which was really Monday night China time. So I didn't even know what day it was. Like, by the time I got home, what day is it? I don't even have any idea what day I'm in. And I didn't, the flying was easy. Like, when I arrived in Vancouver, I was actually kind of, in some ways, disappointed because there were no strict regulations at all. People weren't wearing masks. At this point, I was wearing a mask because I was used to being in Asia. So I had my mask on all the time. I arrived at the airport. Nobody had masks on. All I got was, did you have a fever? Nope. Walked right on through. It was the quickest flights I've ever had because there were nobody waiting in line. And then from there I went on to Toronto. I arrived at 12:30 a.m. The airport was empty. Like, I have pictures and there's no one in the airport. Same thing, nobody's wearing masks. I had a 15-hour layover at the airport in Toronto.
Thanks.
And then from Toronto to Halifax, I got on the flight. And nobody, again, flight attendants with no mask. There were about 4 of us on the plane with masks. I think we had all been to Asia. And nobody's got masks on. And I'm thinking, what is happening right now? And then finally, when I got to Halifax, I thought, okay, but they just gave me a piece of paper and said, oh, you have to go into 14-day self-isolation. Okay. And we did. The whole family did. So Ainsley couldn't go to work. We all stayed home for 14 days. But yeah, so it was quite a change. Like I said, so much fun, travel, and then the last 2 weeks in Asia were, again, not fun. And just, 'cause every border was closing and people were wearing masks and there were no tourists anymore. And yeah, it was eerie.
What was it like seeing your family again after all of this?
It's funny, when you go away, it's like you never left. So it was so nice. It was so nice the first few days just to talk all about everything that went on and my experiences. And yeah, it was really something, but it was strange to be in the house and not be able to go out. I had made there was still snow when I arrived. So I had a figure 8 created in the backyard with my snowshoes, and I would go out and do the figure 8 for my exercise in the backyard.
And then right back in.
And then go right back in. Every now and then when I'd run around the house, like I'd go around the house.
So having had an experience like this, what kind of impact does it make on you as you prepare to re-enter the classroom in the coming days, especially given the difficult balance that you'll have to strike to be able to ensure that your own students social distance and follow the COVID-19 rules?
I found the readjustment hard. The regulations are stricter here than they were there. So, like, my students have gone, my ex-students that are in China, I have pictures of them now, and they've gone back to class and they don't all have to wear masks. Some of them have them on, but a lot of them don't. So, that's interesting. But coming back into a system that has social distancing, and I'm anxious. I'm very anxious about, I'm not anxious about the coronavirus. That's not what makes me anxious. I'm really happy to be going back to school. I really want to see those students in case we get shut down again. I want to make those connections with the students. But it's just, I've been in my classroom the last week and a half, and it feels wrong. Like, I'm there and my desks are all separated and they're all facing the front. Like, the kids can't work in groups and they have to keep their social distance even with their masks on. And even books, you can't peruse books because then somebody else is touching them. I'm going back, but with a lot of kind of anxiety. Coming back and having it the situation that it is, like, I taught online for since February. So coming back to a regular classroom that's not regular is definitely going to be a challenge.
As you prepare for this new challenge here at home, what do you think you're taking away from your time in Asia over the past year? And for that matter, do you think you might have learned something about yourself during that time?
To me, it's the most wonderful thing. And even when I would get in situations that seemed like it was scary, it teaches you how to cope, and it teaches you kind of what you're made of when you are put into situations that you just have to roll with it. So I think I learned some of that, just roll with it. I'm much better at rolling with it when I'm away than I am when I'm in my own life. Yeah. So, And I guess the other thought would be just think, I know COVID is really difficult for everyone, but again, I need to just put in a plug for countries where they don't have any support. So countries like Cambodia, where their basic tourist industry has collapsed and they're out of work and there's no government support. So I just think we're pretty lucky to be living here in Canada where our government has been supporting us.